Thank you. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, church family. Well, it's so good to be with you. So many people have asked, what are you doing north? I don't ever know how to take that, actually. What are you doing north? All I know is where I would normally turn left and go to our south campus, my car went straight. But it is great to be with you. It always is. Let me give you a little glimpse before we dive into our fourth and final message in our series. Some of you would be interested in this. Others of you don't care at all. So I'll keep this portion brief. But to give you a quick glimpse into the life of a pastor and preparation of messages, in full disclosure, there are times that you have preaching as many messages as we have, where we sit down and like pen in hand, I still do it old school, do so much on the computer, but still for me, I just want to write out what God has given me in terms of a message. And sometimes, quite honestly, you have days where you're like, all right, Jesus, anytime you're ready, I'm here, I'm ready, I'm waiting, come on, I need you. You always need, but give me something. And then there are other times, like this week, where it's like God has given it so fast to you that you can hardly keep up with it. And you feel like you've got more than you're able to share. And I know what some of you are thinking. If that's how you're feeling today, since you're speaking north, I would have preferred that you be sharing something that was short on content rather than long. And I get that, and I'm sensitive to the time. And if you'll pray for me, I'll be able to determine going through this message what portions to leave in and what portions to cut out and save for another day. But we've come to our fourth and final message in this series, Slaying Giants. Pastor Blackburn's done a wonderful job here at the North Campus with that, hasn't he? Slaying giants. Man, what's the reality? The reality is this. I've mentioned it before on like Wednesday nights, talking about the upcoming Sunday. You know, David, the whole idea for this series flows out of David when he faced the mighty Goliath. And you know the story, how that every day, the army of Israel would come and they would line up near the valley and they'd just be like, all right, let's fight, let's get into it. And that all sounded well and good until Goliath made his appearance, and he would walk down and he would taunt the army of Israel, and he would taunt the God of Israel. And you've read the account. You know what would happen, that the army of Israel, they would just flee. And so one day David shows up, and he's come to bring some grilled cheese sandwiches. That's a modern translation to his brothers. And he sees this all playing out, and it just gets all over him, really. And he says, how in the world can you stand here every day and this army marches down and Goliath comes out and he not only taunts you, but he taunts your God, and you turn away and flee? And David said, God helping me, this is going to end. And that day, how many of you know that David put Goliath on his back and chopped his head off, and Goliath was no more? That's a fact. But how many of you know this? There are still giants in the land today. There really are. We know that because we face them all the time. You face them, I face them. We've talked about them in this series, the giant of adversity. We've talked in this series about the giant of just, the whole fear and worry and anxiety. And we know that we're living in a day when anxiety is like off the charts, isn't it? You know this. I know this. I was in a setting recently in a dinner, and somebody, it's like around the table. It's like everybody that was at that table said, I'm struggling with fear, with anxiety. And then we talked about last week, rejection. But for the next several minutes, I want to talk about a giant that is just as real and just as perilous and just as taunting as the others that have been previously mentioned to this point. It's the giant of apathy. The giant of apathy. And I want to just say, friends, and I hope that all of you will stay with me, give me your best mental horsepower for the next 31, 32 minutes. But I'm just telling you, if this giant does get you in a sturdy grip, or it has already gotten you in a sturdy grip, well, I've just got to tell you, you've got a massive fight on your hands with this one. Not that the others aren't imposing, and they are in every way, but there's something about the giant of apathy. It's a challenging battle. It's one that is not easy to win. I'm just being candid. It's not easy to win, but with God's help, the good news is it's a winnable battle. So if you will hang in here with me until the very end, I believe you'll be glad that you did. But just before we get to our text for today, let's candidly look at just a few what I think are sad and sobering statistics. According to World Vision, and I went there this week in preparation for this message, World Vision, in 2022, just last year, nearly 258 million people. You think about that number, it's a staggering number. Nearly 258 million people across 58 countries face crises or, listen to this now, crises or higher levels of food insecurity. And then they explain, crises levels and above indicate that affected people had so little food that their lives were in, and here's some key words too, were in immediate danger. Immediate danger. I kept reading this World Vision, one of many great organizations. The same site said that there are, and this is emotional to me just when I think about it. 30 million children today are dangerously malnourished. You think about that. I can remember a number of years ago being on a missions trip, and some of you were on that trip. And I can remember the country that we were in, and I disappeared for a while one day because the missionary, who was our host missionary, came to me and he said, Jeff, do you want to go with me today? And how many of you know if the host missionary says that, that means you're going with him today? And so as it turned out, it was a perfect day for me. We had all of our clinics set up. I was not needed to do any surgery that day. It wasn't necessary for me to do any dental work that day. So I said, sure, I'll go. He said, and Jeff, I'm going to take you to a place like you've never seen. And I thought to myself, well, I've been around quite a few times, different places of the world. I've seen a lot. But he was right. We drove and drove and drove. Some of you will, because you were on this trip, we drove very, very close. He said, we're going to be, when we finally stop, we're going to be near the border of Ecuador and Colombia. And I said, okay. So we just drove. And we talked, and I mean, we got further and further away from all signs of civilization. I mean, to me, we were headed to Mars. I mean, I'm like, there can't be any. I hadn't seen people for miles and miles and miles. And then we got to a place, and he's like, all right, we're going to drive up this mountain. And it was the first group of people that I had seen for a long period of time. And so there were several guys at the base of this mountain. We drive up this mountain, and he walked me around the village that he had had ministry to. And I'm telling you, friends, I'm telling you, I've seen a lot. But it was poverty at an inconceivable level. I don't even know how they made it from day to day. He said, and he's a missionary who sees everything in that region. He said, Jeff, this is the poorest place I've ever been to in all my life. It was the poorest place I had ever been to at that stage in my life. We were there a while, loved on the people, walked into, you couldn't even call it a home. And then afterwards, we got back in his vehicle, we left. And I noticed, because I've got an eye for detail, I'm like, we're not going back down the same way that we came up this mountain. And so I brought it to his attention. I said, hey, called his name. I said, why aren't we going back the way that we came? And he said to me, he looked over at me rather calmly, which irritated me once he told me what he told me. And he said, Jeff, he said, if we go back down that way, you saw those guys at the base of the mountain, they'll be waiting for us when we go back, and they will take our vehicle and leave us out in the middle of nowhere. I said, I believe it's God's will that we should go down the other side of the mountain. And I thought to myself, if you will steer, I'll control the gas. And I'll push it to the floor because I want to get out of here. That's the world that we live in. I did some more reading. Some of you have heard these facts. More than 1 billion people in the world live on less than $1 per day. Close to 2 billion others live on less than $2 per day. Later this afternoon, do a little calculation on your phone or on your calculator and add up, multiply, and then divide by 365, and you'll see what you and I live on every day. More than 1 billion people, less than $1 per day. 2 billion, almost half the world. And there are many other heartbreaking statistics, really, that I could share with you, but there's not enough time for one setting. And we don't even have adequate time this morning to get to all of the unreached people groups of the world. We'll be doing more of that in our missions conference. But having said this, it does beg the question, doesn't it? Where will people just like this find some real help? Where will people just like this and many others find some desperately needed hope? I'll throw out some options just for fun. How many of you think the solution is going to be world governments? How many of you don't think so? How many of you think it's going to be celebrities? They're going to come through. Well, there's generous celebrities, no doubt. But is that the ultimate hope for these people? I think not. You know better. Is it politicians? Well, we'll stop right there on that one. How about members of the media? They seem to care, right? Is that the answer to the helplessness and the hopelessness of this world? And I've just got to stop right here and say, I believe, you've heard it before, this is nothing new, that local churches and followers of Jesus are still the hope of the world. It is. It's the hope of the world. And I want to just say, friends, unless churches and believers come through, there's not much optimism for the poor or the broken or the spiritually lost in our world. So we can like it or not, we can rebuff it or not, but that you got to hear this, that responsibility falls to churches like ours. And it's more personal than that. That responsibility also falls to believers like us. And what are we going to do? I want to dive into one of the most meaningful and essential parables that Jesus ever taught. In it, he tells a story, a remarkable story, no less, that when he told it, I'm just telling you, friends, when he told this story, I don't have time to get into the context, but when he told this story to the people that he told it to, it was absolutely jaw-dropping. They're like, I can't even believe that he would tell this story in this parable. What happens? Jesus tells us that one day there was a Jewish traveler who happened to be in Jewish territory when he is suddenly beaten and robbed and left for dead. Many of you know this story. It's obviously terrible in every way, but if you know the historical reality of that time, it was not uncommon in that day, and it was not uncommon in that particular region. So it's terrible. But it appears that there's going to be some help on the way. If you remember the story, you come to understand that walking in this guy's direction just happens to be a religious leader. And not too far behind him is the staff member of a local place of worship. So, help is on the way, right? You would think so. But then Jesus tells the story. And friends, you may have to go back and read it again. But it has an unexpected twist to it. It really does. Well, what happens next? You ready for this? This religious leaders, again, most of you know this account. You know this story that Jesus told in this most famous of parables. This religious leader sees this seriously injured man in the distance. So seeing him in the distance, he alters his path. He navigates it a few degrees away, and the closer he gets, the farther away he gets, until by the time he gets to the severely beaten man, left for dead, he is on the other side of the road, and he just passes by. He does not even flinch for a moment at this guy's condition. But not to panic, right? There's this other guy that is on the way, not too far behind the religious leader, not carrying quite the religious clout of this guy, but there's no reason for alarm. The second man is coming along, and how many of you know that the second religious guy does the exact same thing, doesn't he? If you know it, wave at me. I have the South Campus do that, so I know. Now, you got to know that where I preach every Sunday, it's dark, and the seats recline, and I'm always afraid I'm going to lose people in the middle of the message. So just for my own security, from time to time I'll say, if you're with me, wave your hand. So I'm good. Let me do it. Are you still with me? Wave your hand. Second guy, nothing's different. But Jesus says, there's one more guy. And this guy has no religious affiliation whatsoever, at least that Jesus mentions. This guy's a total long shot. He's just an ordinary business guy on his way to a meeting that he cannot miss. And oh, by the way, Jesus says that this business guy is from an ethnic group that hates Jews and that Jews hate. Think about it. It's this man's only hope. So where's Jesus going with this story? Now, at this point, what is absolutely mind-blowing to Jesus' listeners is that this hated Samaritan man did something so antithetical to what the two Jewish religious leaders had done. Jesus said, and this is the point that we can't miss, are you with me? Jesus said that this man does something so differently. This is what Jesus said, that this man felt something in his heart, and then he did something with his hands. And then Jesus made a statement. I'm just telling you, friends, it rocked them. It jolted them to the core. And Jesus said, I want all of you to be like this man. And you've got to understand the ethnic conflicts that were going on. How many of you believe that it wasn't really popular when Jesus said to a Jewish crowd, I want you to be more like this Samaritan? And they're like, oh my. And it gets their attention. And hopefully it gets our attention as well. Jesus was making a statement to them, and I believe that he's making the same statement to you and I today. Jesus crafts this parable very intentionally. If I had time to just unpack that, I would. But in some of the nuances that are so captivating to me, Jesus talks about things like how it's like Jesus is saying to them and to us, how can these two religious guys be so lacking? Think about it. How can these two religious guys be so lacking in normal levels of human compassion? In one of his many books, and you'll see this on the screen, Craig Rochelle has written this. If you say that you care, but then don't act on that feeling, then look on this highlighted phrase. It's the same as not caring at all. I'm telling you, friends, this giant of apathy is no joke. He's ruthless. He's calculating. He plays dirty. And if he ever gets you or me in a corner, we're going to have to fight our way out in a way that maybe we wouldn't even have to fight our way out with a giant of adversity or fear or with rejection. And he's forcefully accentuating this reality that until our heart is open, I want you to think about this. Until our heart is fully open and deeply touched by the love of Jesus, it is going to be exceedingly difficult for our heart to be moved in the direction of the hurting and hopelessness and lostness of others. Let me say that again. It's going to be really difficult until our heart is open to and deeply touched by the love of Jesus. It's going to be really difficult for our hearts to move in the direction of the hurting and hopelessness and lostness of others. And verses just like this one bring clarity to this point. Let's read it together, will you? 1 John 4:19. You'll see it on the screen. What does it say? Would you read it, everybody, aloud with me? Everybody's like, by the way, not 88.2%, it's like 100%. You ready? Let's all read it together. We love because he first loved us. So, in the balance of our time, it would be quite easy. You could take this parable. Pastor could do it. We could do it. We could take this parable. We're not doing it at this season in our church's life, but you could take it and devote an entire message series to just this parable. But in the time that we have remaining, let's highlight two major takeaways from this story. One of which, be sure you get it down somewhere, one of which is that this Samaritan business guy, it says that he went to him. He actually went to him. He got close enough to see his face, to know his name, to assess his need. Check out the A part of verse 34. This is the story. This is Luke chapter 10. What does it say? Read it. Will you help me again? The Samaritan went to him, poured olive oil on his wounds, and bandaged them. Think about that. He went to him. He went to him. Now, why does that matter? It sometimes does wonders to a hardened, apathetic heart when you slow down long enough to see the depth of a need. I can remember, it's been a number of years ago. It's been so long ago that our son Drew was only 9 years of age. It was his first trip, obviously. It was one of my early trips, and I just thought at the ripe old age of 9, it would be good for him to see how kids in other parts of the world live. And I can remember going on that trip, and he and I, we would be eventually joining a team, but it was just he and I traveling together. I remember sitting in the back of the plane. I remember landing. It was a frightening airport in terms of the weaponry that you saw as soon as you came off the plane. I was hoping, especially with him being with me, I'd not be detained by customs, but I was. And as I was, I remembered what a missionary had told me several years before. He said, Jeff, whenever you're in a different country, I don't know if he was giving me good or bad advice. It's up for speculation at this point. But he said, if you're ever in another country and you get detained by customs, they're going to be speaking a language that you don't understand, and they're not going to understand you. So whatever they're saying to you, just nod and smile. They detained us. They opened up Drew's suitcase. They opened up my suitcase. And then they started talking. I have no idea what they were asking me. They could have been asking me, do you plan on illegal activity in our country? And all I knew to do was to nod and smile. Yes, I am. Exactly. You got it. Are you bringing drugs into our country? Yes, I am. I'm bringing them. Full measure. I have no idea what they were asking me. I can remember the last day that we were there. I noticed Drew, when he would just get on the periphery, it's certainly close enough, being that young, that I kept my eye on him constantly. And I could see him start, playing with some of the kids in that very, very poverty-stricken area. And I could see he was making a little connection with them. But I knew, because he would ask me quite often, Dad, when are we giving out the candy? Because what they found in customs, we may have not been loaded up with drugs, but we were loaded up with candy. And on that final day, man, he just took those bags of candy, and and you've done this, I've done this, we've all done it. But it was a big deal for him at that age, just handing out all this candy. I can remember a cute little girl, dirty little girl, but cutest little thing you ever saw. And Drew went to give her something else, and she waved him off and held up that she already had a lollipop. And I thought, man, this girl may never get a lollipop the rest of her days, but she wanted to make sure all the other kids had a lollipop before she would get two. Man, I think about that. I can remember being on another trip, and some of you have had this experience where, at the end of the trip, the organization, and this was a very respectable organization that was represented, they passed out to all of us that were there, these little cards that told us about a child somewhere in a poverty-stricken part of our world that needed help, that needed support, and maybe we would pray about, and maybe we'd find a way that we could give, so that these kids, that they would be able to go to a Christian school every day, which otherwise they would never have a chance for something like that, so that they could get a good education, so that they would get the very best meal that they would have of their entire day, so that they would hear about Jesus and hopefully take Jesus home to their mom and to their dad. And so there's a lot of us, and they passed them all out, and I opened up my card, and I looked at the face of a little boy. This became personal to this Samaritan guy. There's a name and there's a face. He went to him. His heart expands. He sees a need, but he went to this, and now he takes it. And I can remember opening up that card, and when I opened it up, the name of the little boy, little guy, his name was Jeffrey. Now, his mom spelled his name correctly. My mom did not. I don't hold it against her. She was only 17. I think she was under the effect still of anesthesia. And they said, well, how do you want to spell his name? And she gave it. And so I'm not like Jeffrey like all the other people in the world. I'm Jeffrey. And I need to talk that out with somebody sometime. But I looked at the card. You know what his name was? Jeffrey. You know what he wanted to be when he grew up? He wanted to be a pastor. How many of you know God fully intended me to support that little boy? Absolutely. And I did, and long story short, he aged out and then took on Elian, another kid in a different country. But you got to get your hands involved. You got to do something. And again, it sometimes does wonders to a hardened, apathetic heart when you slow down to see the depth of a need. I think about that right here at home. We can talk about places of the world, but we can do that at home. What about the Dream Center? We can see a need. We can know a name. We can recognize a face. What about Kids Club, Sidewalk, Sunday School? And again, the missions trips. Look at verse 34 in its totality. He went to him and bandaged up his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn to take care of him. So that's one thing. Here's the second major takeaway from Jesus' parable. You ready for this? Some of you, are you ready? This Samaritan guy, he not only went to him, you know what he also did? He wrote a check. He wrote a check. He became financially invested in this guy's need. Take a look now at verse 35. The next day, look at this highlighted phrase. The next day, he handed the innkeeper 2 silver coins, telling him, take care of this man, and if his bill runs higher than this, I'll pay you the next time I'm here. He wrote a check. He became financially invested. I'm a football guy, so we need a quick timeout right here before we proceed. I told you before that this giant of apathy, he plays for keeps. He's no joke. He's ruthless. How do you know, how do I know that we're finally beginning to feel a release from this fierce grip, from this giant of apathy? How do we know when it's finally beginning to loosen? And we will know it. And I want you to get this. We will know it because it will hit us like a lightning bolt. It will hit us the day we conventionally say to ourselves something like this: God has blessed me in ways that I don't even deserve. How many of you will say that right here, right now? God has blessed me. It will hit you that day when you say, God has blessed me in ways that I do not even deserve. And yet I realize that it's not all to be used for personal consumption. You get the message there? Let me say it again. We will know, we will unmistakably know that this grip from this giant of apathy is beginning to loosen his grip. Well, like David, we're going to put this giant on his back and take off his head. The day we realize that we have all been blessed by God in ways that we don't deserve, and yet it's not for our own personal consumption. Why has God blessed you? Why has God blessed me? God has blessed us so that we might be a blessing to the world. I think we will realize that this grip of apathy is dissipating when over the next 2 weeks, we hold in hand a faith promise card during our missions conference. And our expanding heart will tell us, if you will listen, it will tell us that we have to do something, friends, for the hopeless and the hurting and the lost of our world. And we will say, God, you have blessed my life in so many ways. Just look at my home. And some of you may say, well, Jeff, my home's not that great. Compared to most of the world, it's phenomenal. Do you remember that old song, Count Your Blessings? Did I say it right? Name your blessings. It's one. Name them, count them. Doesn't matter to me, but there's blessings. Think about your house. Think about your car. Think about your clothes, your food, your phone. I mean, think about it. A lot of us carry phones that the value of it is more than a lot of the world makes an entire year. Think about our hobbies. Think about our kids. Think about our grandkids. And I don't want it to be mistaken. And if you hear something other than what I'm telling you, then you've heard wrong. God is totally fine with you and me being blessed. He is. How many of you know that? Wave at me. God is totally fine with you and I being blessed unless we believe that it is all for personal consumption. Jesus tells us that this Samaritan sees this severely beaten Jew in great need. And so he handed the innkeeper 2 silver coins, telling him, take care of this man. Jesus also tells us this in Luke chapter 12, and Pastor Dan mentioned it earlier. Read this one, everybody, help me out. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. I'm out of time. So let me close with a verse and with a story. Here's the verse. You'll see it on the screen. Your Father sees what you do. How many of you know that? Your Father sees. How many of you know that's not bad news? That's good news. Your Father sees. How do we know it's good news? Your Father sees what you do. Read the rest of it for me. Will you read it? What does it say? He sees what you do, and he's going to reward you. I close with one of my favorite stories I've ever heard. And it reminds us that at the end of the day, that there's a loving Heavenly Father that has blessed us and looking down on us to find reasons for you and I to do good in this world. It reminds us that we live our life not for everybody, but primarily for an audience of one. Bill McCartney, some of you may remember that name, former coach of the Colorado Buffaloes football team. Founders, how many of you guys remember Promise Keepers? He was the founder of Promise Keepers. And he tells this story, and I'll tell it in his own words. He said the Illinois football team was going to play on Saturday for the Big Ten championship and the right to go to the Rose Bowl in Pasadena. The excitement and anticipation in Illinois was sky high because this game was at home, and Illinois had not been to the Rose Bowl in 20 years. On Friday, the day before the game, a kid by the name of John Wong came up to his coach and said, Coach, you've just got to let me start in tomorrow's game. The request startled the coach, and he stepped back and said, John, you're a great kid. You're a senior. You've done everything I've ever asked you to do. You're a tremendous student. But let's be honest, you play behind the captain of the team in your linebacker position, and you haven't started a game since you've been here. How can I put you in a starting role in a game of this magnitude? Big tears started streaming down Juan's face. Coach, he said, I know that's true, but you've got to start me. Well, the coach was moved, but he didn't know what to say. So he bought himself a little extra time and said, I'll tell you what, let me sleep on it. I'll have an answer for you in the morning. McCartney says, you know, college football teams stay in hotels the night before the game, even for home games. And just by coincidence, John Wong's room was on the same floor as the coach's. Bright and early on Saturday morning, John Wong was pounding on the coach's door. He wanted an answer. The coach came to the door and said, I'll tell you what I'm going to do, John. I thought about it, and I've decided to put you in on the opening kickoff. That's a pretty smart coach, right? That way, technically, you'll be starting the game. The stakes are very high, and I can't promise you any more than that. As fate would have it, Illinois kicked off that day, and John Wong ran down the field faster than anybody had ever seen him run. And he made a resounding tackle at the 18-yard line. The captain started on the field, but the coach pulled him back and said, listen, after a hit like that, let's give him one more play. On the first play from scrimmage, the opponent ran a trick play. The quarterback pitched the ball to the tailback. The tailback looked like he was going to sweep to the far side. Then he stopped. He planted his feet and threw a pass to the quarterback, sneaking out of the backside. Somehow, John Wong, who was playing linebacker, diagnosed the play, stepped in front of the quarterback, intercepted the pass, ran untouched into the end zone for a touchdown. The kicker missed the extra point. The game was not 5 minutes old, and Illinois was already ahead 6-0. John Wong continued to play, and he was all over the field. They had to substitute the captain at the other linebacker position because John Wong was dominating the game from his position. The 6-0 score held up throughout the entire game. Then the game was in the last minute. The opponent had the ball for one last play. The quarterback sent his fastest receiver down the sidelines, and he threw the ball as far as he could, hoping that there would be a last-second miracle. Wong retreated from his linebacker position. Those of you that know football, he was not a defensive back. He retreated from his linebacker position, flicked the ball. It fell harmlessly to the ground. The place erupted. Illinois was going to the Rose Bowl. The coach was carried off the field. As he got into the locker room, he looked over, and in the corner, all by himself, was John Wong. And he was sobbing like a baby. The coach walked over and said, John, what's the matter? You almost single-handedly won the game. No one has ever seen you play like that. What was going on out there, son? It took the kid a while, but he gained his composure and said, Coach, you know my daddy is blind? Of course I do, said the coach. Many times your friends have wheeled him onto the practice field so that he could listen to us practice. Well, said John Wong, my dad died Thursday night, and I figured this is the first time he ever had a chance to see me play. John Wong, you get the point, right? John Wong was playing for an audience of one, and it made all the difference in the world. And Jesus looks at us, and he blesses us in ways that none of us deserve. And then he starts showing us the hurt and the hopelessness and the lostness of the world. And he says, you have got to do something about that. I'm telling you, friends, the local church, like Victory Church, that is our church that we love. And believers just like us who love Jesus, we have this responsibility. But you know what I know about our church? You know what I know about you? You will rise to the occasion. Because Jesus, who blessed us in ways that we don't deserve, he looks at us and he says, what are you going to do with what I've given? And then we help the world. And we do it for them, but we do it because just like John Wong, we do it for an audience of one. How many want to stand before Jesus one day, hear Jesus say, well done. You've been a good and a faithful servant. Let's stand. Everybody okay out there? Wave at me. Wow. Think about where we're at this stage in our life. For such a time as this, we've come into the kingdom of God. And you and I get a chance to make a difference. Here's what we're going to do, and it won't take us long. I'm going to ask the worship team. They've got a song that they're going to lead us in. And whatever your need is today, and it could be various. Maybe you've got a need. Maybe you need to be anointed with oil because you're sick in body. Maybe you're sick in your soul, your spirit. You're not in a relationship with Jesus. You're spiritually lost, and you just want somebody to pray with you and lead you to Jesus. And our altar workers are fully prepared to do this. Maybe you need to come down, and you need to just say, I need this giant of apathy to be broken. I'm telling you, I don't know if God worked you over in this message, but he did me in ways that I can't even describe. And I'm like, God, I've got to break out of that. I've got, with your help, to do better. And maybe you feel that way too. And this altar is open. We're going to sing a song. Those of you that don't come, let's just pray this song. Change my heart, God. Make my heart just like this. God, just grow my heart. Expand my heart. And then we'll sing that, and I'll come back and give a final prayer. So those of you that need to come forward, come forward. If you want to sing and worship and ask God to just expand your heart, you do that from where you're standing, and then we'll pray.
Change my heart, oh God. Make it ever true. Change my heart, oh may I be like you. Sing that again. Change my heart, oh God. Change my heart, oh God. Make it ever true. Change my heart. Change my heart, oh God. May I be like you. 'Cause you are. You are the potter. I am the clay. Mold me and make me. This is what I pray. Change my heart. Change my heart, oh God. Make it ever true. Change my heart, oh God. May I be like you.
I'm so grateful for the opportunities that God gives us as a church. Church that God has used in so many ways. But how many of you know that God is going to use us, I believe, in ways that we could never even imagine? I believe God's going to use you in ways. He's blessed us so much. I mean, just count his blessings. I've had a dry mouth for about a week and a half, and this saved my life today. It may have got on your nerves, but it saved my life. But you know what? God will help us. God will help. How many of you believe God will help us and we'll make a difference in ways that we never have before? Let's pray. God, we want to have a heart that is growing. We always want to have hands that are open. We pray that with your divine help, this giant of apathy will be destroyed once and for all. That we'll put him on his back and cut off his head, just like David did with Goliath. Thank you, God, for your blessings in our life. They're not coincidental. You've given us a wonderful opportunity to bless the hurting and the hopeless and the lost of this world. And we thank you for this God-ordained opportunity. In Jesus' name, and everybody said, amen. I love you, everybody. Have an awesome, awesome week. We'll see you next Sunday.
Change my heart, oh God. Make it ever true. Change my heart.